Mick Jagger has spent more than 6 decades as one of the most photographed, interviewed, and mythologized men in popular music. For most of that time, he has managed his public image with a discipline that borders on the theatrical, deflecting, joking, performing distance even while answering direct questions. But across a string of recent interviews, authorized biography excerpts, and his own bandmates' memoirs, a quieter version of the story has come into focus. Piece by piece, using his own words and the accounts of the people closest to him, Jagger has confirmed things that fans and journalists had suspected for years but rarely heard him say plainly. This is that story, built from verified interviews, documentaries, and reporting, not speculation. For decades, the mythology around Mick Jagger and Keith Richards cast them as the Glimmer Twins, a single creative organism that happened to occupy 2 bodies. What both men have since confirmed, in their own words, is considerably more complicated than that. Richards laid it out most bluntly in his 2010 memoir, Life. He wrote that he and Jagger may not be friends, too much wear and tear for that, while insisting they remain the closest of brothers, a bond that can't be severed. His explanation captured something that 60 years of joint interviews had mostly papered over: best friends are best friends. But brothers fight. Richards traced part of the fracture to the pressures of fame and to his 1977 heroin arrest in Toronto, while also crediting Jagger with holding the band together during that crisis, running the business side, managing the fallout, and, in Richards's words, looking after him like a brother without complaint. That divide widened further in the early 1980s. By 1981, according to multiple accounts of the period, the two were barely speaking during recording sessions and took to tracking their vocal and guitar parts separately rather than working in the same room. Jagger's public comments to Rolling Stone around that time, suggesting the band might be finished, pushed Richards toward his own solo project, Talk Is Cheap, released in 1988. It took the 1989 Steel Wheels tour to thaw things, and even that thaw was partial. What is notable is how each man has since described the arrangement that followed, not reconciliation, but a working peace. Richards has said he loves Jagger 99% of the time, attributing the friction to nothing more exotic than 2 guys working together for 6 decades. He has also acknowledged that fronting his own band during the Talk Is Cheap years gave him a new appreciation for what Jagger absorbs as the person who runs the Rolling Stones day to day, the pressure of being the one who has to hold a room, manage a crew, and answer for the whole enterprise. That is Jagger's confirmed role within the band. Not merely its singer, but its chief operating officer, a job Richards admits he never fully understood until he tried leading something himself. The dynamic has not softened as they've aged. Richards told Wall Street Journal magazine in 2018 that the friction between them has been artistically useful. Mick and I live off of this fire between us, which is as close as he has come to admitting the tension is not an unfortunate byproduct of the partnership but one of its actual engines. Jagger, for his part, has rarely matched that level of public candor about the relationship's cost. His public style has always been to acknowledge the difficulty in general terms, brothers fight, essentially, without his own gloss, while letting Richards do the more colorful confirming. But the through line in both men's accounts is consistent. The Rolling Stones survived not because Jagger and Richards resolved their differences, but because they built a working relationship durable enough not to need resolution. If the relationship with Richards is the one Jagger has managed with careful ambiguity, his relationship with Brian Jones is the one he has become surprisingly direct about, but only decades after the fact. Jones founded the Rolling Stones, named the band after a Muddy Waters song, and was, in the group's earliest configuration, its de facto leader, booking the shows, signing the contracts, and speaking to the press on the band's behalf. According to bassist Bill Wyman's own account, that changed once manager Andrew Loog Oldham began pushing Jagger and Richards forward as the band's songwriting engine and public face, sidelining Jones both creatively and in the media. Jones's confidence and his standing in the band eroded together, and his drug and alcohol use worsened as his role diminished. Jagger's most direct public reckoning with what happened next came in an interview with Rolling Stone founder Jan Wenner, in which Jagger acknowledged firing Jones was necessary because Jones had become, in his words, a liability who wasn't playing well, wasn't playing at all, couldn't hold the guitar. But in the same conversation, Jagger went further than the standard band history explanation. Asked directly whether he felt guilty, he said no, but added an admission that carried more weight than the denial. "I do feel that I behaved in a very childish way, but we were very young, and in some ways we picked on him." He acknowledged that Jones made himself a target through jealousy and difficult behavior, but conceded, "If you do that in this kind of a group of people, you get back as good as you give." He also admitted the band simply didn't understand addiction at the time. No one seemed to know much about drug addiction. People thought cocaine was good for you, which reframes the band's treatment of Jones less as calculated cruelty and more as the ignorance of very young, very famous men who had no framework for what they were watching happen to a bandmate. Jones was voted out of the band in June 1969 and allowed to frame his departure publicly as a resignation over musical differences, a courtesy the band extended him on the way out. Less than a month later, on July 3, 1969, he was found dead in the swimming pool at his home in East Sussex. He was 27. The coroner's ruling was drowning, misadventure, with an enlarged liver from drug and alcohol use listed as a contributing factor. Conspiracy theories about his death have circulated for decades, most centering on a builder who was on the property that night, but no credible evidence has ever overturned the original ruling, and Jagger has never lent public credibility to those theories. What Jagger has confirmed, in the plainest terms he has ever used about the episode, is that the band's youth and the internal culture around Jones's decline made a bad situation worse, and that hindsight makes the band's blindness to his addiction look worse than it felt at the time. It is not an admission of guilt in any legal or dramatic sense. It is something more ordinary and, in some ways, more convincing, an old man admitting that he and his friends were young and cruel in the specific way young men in a closed, high-pressure group often are, and that he has made peace with that fact without pretending it didn't happen. No single night in Jagger's career has been mythologized more, or understood less accurately, than December 6, 1969, at the Altamont Speedway in Northern California. The documented facts are straightforward. The Rolling Stones organized a free concert, announced only days in advance, with security supplied informally by local chapters of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The event spiraled into violence over the course of the day, and an 18-year-old named Meredith Hunter was fatally stabbed by a Hells Angels member during the Stones' set, an incident captured on film and later included in the documentary Gimme Shelter. The man who stabbed Hunter, Alan Passaro, was charged with murder and acquitted on grounds of self-defense, since footage showed Hunter had drawn a revolver moments before. Cultural shorthand turned Altamont into a symbol, the moment the idealism of the 1960s curdled into its own violence. What has received far less attention, though it is well documented by a BBC investigative program built substantially on the account of a retired FBI agent, is what happened afterward. According to that reporting, Hells Angels members were furious that Jagger publicly condemned the club's conduct at Altamont, and in retaliation allegedly planned to kill him at his rented home on Long Island. The plot reportedly involved approaching the property by boat to avoid conventional security, and it collapsed only because a storm nearly capsized the boat before it reached shore. The documentary's own reporting notes it remains unclear whether Jagger was informed of the plot at the time, or only learned of it later through reporting like this. Whatever the precise timeline of what Jagger knew and when, the substance of the story is confirmed by multiple independent outlets covering the same underlying documentary evidence. Jagger's public criticism of the Hells Angels after Altamont very nearly got him killed, through a plot he may not have even been aware of while it was unfolding. It is a strange footnote to a night already saturated with tragedy, a reminder that the consequences of Jagger's public statements have, at times, extended into territory he never saw and could not have controlled. If Altamont showed what could happen to Jagger because of what he said publicly, the 2003 Knighthood controversy showed what could happen between him and Richards because of what Jagger accepted privately. When Jagger was named a knight in the Queen's 2003 New Year honors, Richards did not stay quiet. In an interview with Uncut magazine, he said he went ing berserk over the news, calling it ludicrous to take one of those gongs from the establishment when they did their very best to throw us in jail, a reference to the pair's 1967 drug conviction, later overturned on appeal. Richards argued the honor contradicted everything the band had built its identity on. It's not what the Stones is about, is it? He also pushed back on Jagger's stated justification, that then Prime Minister Tony Blair had encouraged him to accept it, dismissing that as no excuse at all. Jagger's counter, when asked to respond, was characteristically light rather than defensive. He suggested Richards was simply jealous of the recognition, comparing it to sibling rivalry over ice cream. One gets one and they all want one. Separately, biographical reporting has suggested Queen Elizabeth II herself was reportedly unenthusiastic about the honor and arranged to be elsewhere on the day of the ceremony, leaving Prince Charles to perform the knighting in her place, though that particular detail comes from an unauthorized biography rather than a palace confirmation and should be read with appropriate caution. What both men's public reactions confirm, taken together, is the same pattern visible throughout their partnership. Jagger absorbing institutional respectability while managing the band's commercial future, and Richards positioning himself as the one still guarding whatever authenticity the Stones are supposed to represent. Neither man has ever fully backed down from that division of labor, and neither, by his own account, expects the other to. Jagger's account of his own songwriting has always undercut the mythology more than it feeds it, and that pattern has held in recent years too. His retelling of writing, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" in 1965 is a familiar example, but it's a genuinely well-documented one. The guitar riff reportedly came to Richards half asleep in a Florida hotel room, recorded onto a cassette before he fell back asleep, with the tape running out just after. Nothing about the moment resembled the deliberate construction of a generation-defining anthem. Jagger has said the lyrics themselves came together quickly on tour, more a product of the enforced discipline of touring life than any singular flash of inspiration. That matches a broader pattern he has described in the songwriting partnership generally: extraordinarily high output during the touring years, driven by proximity and routine rather than by dramatic creative breakthroughs. Brown Sugar, by contrast, is a song Jagger has treated with more discomfort in recent decades than he once did. The band quietly dropped it from set lists in the years following the #MeToo era and broader public reassessment of its lyrical content, which touches on slavery and sexual violence in ways Jagger himself has acknowledged he would likely not write today. That retirement from the live show, never framed as a formal ban, simply as a decision, is itself a kind of confirmation, an acknowledgement, without a dramatic mea culpa, that some of the band's own history looks different with 6 more decades of hindsight. None of these confirmations, taken individually, is shocking. Fans have suspected for years that Jagger and Richards were never simple best friends, that the band's early treatment of Brian Jones was uglier than the official history let on, that Altamont's aftermath extended further than the concert itself, and that the songs came from ordinary work far more often than from lightning strike inspiration. What's changed is that Jagger, and the people around him, have stopped managing those stories quite so tightly. Taken together, the pattern that emerges is of a man who has spent 60 years running one of the most scrutinized enterprises in entertainment while keeping a careful distance between what he says and what he privately absorbs. The confirmations arriving now, in his 80s, don't rewrite the Rolling Stones' history. They just finally let the record catch up to what most people who were paying attention already believed. Sources consulted for the script include reporting and interviews from Rolling Stone, the BBC, CNN, Uncut magazine, ABC News, and Keith Richards' 2010 memoir Lifestar. Direct quotations are drawn from those published interviews and are used sparingly and in their original context,